Today in Dragon's Den, we are joined by Chris DeRose, host of Bitcoin Uncensored, to talk about the nature of Bitcoin and the dynamics of the communities in the ecosystem. He is joined by Shinobi, Risho, and Davey. The content found herein should be taken as open-minded conversation. We are not experts. Cryptocurrency is an emerging topic of research, and we encourage you to carry out your own due diligence.
But I guess then, one of the things you said yesterday when we were kind of talking on the Telegram, and I brought up the whole notion of like John Nash's sound money and the industrial consumption index, was like, what's the use case for Bitcoin aside from regulatory arbitrage? And I think that like that does have an answer. It's just it's only something that really is functionally true at a large enough scale and given a certain number of caveats. Like one, it's obviously just in sheer size and capitalization. It needs to be something on the weight or par with an actual world currency, like the dollar or the euro or the yen. And it really does come down to like how much of that coin moving around is on a marketplace, moving back and forth between fiat, and how much is actually changing goods. Because if you really get to the point where most of the volume in terms of Bitcoin moving around is actually in exchange for goods and services, I mean, that really does get to a point where it's a finite supply, and so naturally you have that deflationary aspect. Like the more goods and services produced, it's the same amount of money supply, so that supply is going to go further. And again, if the goods and services or economic value is actually to contract, then you would have that relative inflation. And it really just comes down to if most of that supply is moving, chasing goods and services, and you have that kind of free-floating inflationary or deflationary reaction to that, based on how much economic value is actually being generated, well, then that really does just introduce a binary opportunity cost analysis when it comes to the expenditure of electricity. Is it more profitable to put my electricity directly into the Bitcoin network and earn fees through other people's economic transactions or just through the subsidy? Or is it more profitable to actually expend that energy producing some other good and service in the economy? And, after a point, like that would have to find a natural equilibrium. And like one of the things you said was that you believe that you actually have to have some kind of economic policy for a functional currency. Well, I think that is effectively a policy that organizes itself in a way. And it really will just find its own equilibrium in terms of the monetary supply and how that's interacting with goods and services in the economy. And in a large enough scale, that effectively solves the pricing problem of currencies. Just on its own. And that, regardless of whether it's useful for regulatory arbitrage, is a huge value add on a global scale, because that's really the big economic problem that currency policy struggles with, is how to actually map their monetary policy to the actual economic activity.
Okay, so you got a bunch in there, and we're going to probably have to go back and forth. I think first and foremost, there's a lot of entitlement, in your opinion, frankly, and that's fine. You're entitled to that, but there is a significant amount of risk in so many components, I think, of the Bitcoin pitch, the Bitcoin rhetoric, and market penetration, and all these things. But for me, I don't believe that Bitcoin is a currency, certainly not at this point. And it's not a currency for, I think, two big reasons. The first big reason is the unit of account, which you touched on, you're certainly aware of. And I think that you can't have a currency in the modern era that doesn't have a reliable unit of account. And I recognize that the dollar is volatile, but the degree to which it's volatile is absolutely minimal compared to the vast majority of currency contenders, shall we say. And then the second problem that is probably the biggest problem in the space right now that nobody wants to talk about because it's too fucking weird, and I have a hard time with it too, which is that the Misans, I think, would label it specie. And I think specie is a good label for the problem, even though the Misans didn't really articulate it well. But it is effectively that Bitcoin doesn't really exist other than in the form that Core says it exists. So now, from a international legal perspective and otherwise, do we get to claim that Bitcoin has an immutable configuration like gold, or do we claim instead that it is itself a mutable value or a mutable store? And it matters for a lot of reasons, not least of which is how the regulatory controls are going to be set forward. And then I think further from that is that, like it or not, there is that means that there's a gigantic governance hole in the Bitcoin community that I don't know that anybody has a good solution to. Certainly not me, though I'm trying to learn. So that's the second problem is I don't think you can define what Bitcoin is without an inordinate governance solution, and I don't know that that's even possible to do. So there's that.
Well, I mean, to get to the second one, I mean, I definitely do see what you mean there. And, I think that's kind of why you see this whole dynamic with developers not really wanting to dictate anything, to simply just propose something and then leave that choice to the I guess the commons, you could call, with the user base, and why you see miners really wrestling to have that control. Because, as far as the developers are concerned right now, they don't really have any economic or legal responsibilities for anything. They're simply developing software that people either choose to use or choose not to use. Whereas when it comes to the miners, they're technically processing payments. So as far as the risk of regulatory action or just illegal action, they are responsible, I guess you could argue, as a money servicing business, because they are actually processing payments that otherwise would not be finalized or settled without them fulfilling the function or role that they do in the network. And that's really the gist of the power struggle. And I mean, I think really that there is an answer there. It's just one that most people don't want to hear and don't like. And that's just Bitcoin is the chain that is recognized as valid by every single client going back to the original Bitcoin client. And that the moment you do something like hard fork or introduce a software client that becomes predominantly used that breaks that compatibility, well, now you've broken that consistency in semantical definition of what is Bitcoin. And as far as the currency supply, I mean, that's kind of where I think that we really do need to kind of move a little bit past conventional ways of thinking about monetary policy and a currency, because that's the entire experiment in my mind with Bitcoin is, can this finitely supplied token that is intricately tied to the proof of work process, where you have proof of work chasing the speculation of value with that token, can that organically function as its own policy, just on its own, left alone? And I think that particularly, in my experience, is the thing that people really have a hard time grasping, because it really is a huge departure from the notion of a supply that is contracted or expanded intentionally by an actual thinking actor there, as opposed to just something that fluxes and finds its own equilibrium.
Okay, there's a lot in there. I'm trying to kind of focus some of those.
Yeah, sorry, I'm
it seemed a little wandery. I mean, here's where it matters. It matters in a couple ways. First off, you've stored your Bitcoin, and that is in your cold storage, and you will thaw it out in 50 years or something, at which point, theoretically now, we have to figure out how many Bitcoins are there, because China might go its own way, and Veer may go a different way, and who knows who shows up and goes his way. So now you have these coins that have a longer age that I guess could be redeemed in all these systems. But if, in fact, there are so many ways to split this thing up, maybe it was never gold to begin with. Maybe it was just a meme, and there's nothing wrong with that. But who's to say that a better meme won't come by? And more so than that, what really is the incentive to long-term hodl when you very well may just be able to get lucky here and there by joining a new scam or a new meme and pumping it up? Maybe the long-term value proposition isn't actually what people want. And I think that's frankly, I think that's what the casinos think. And I think that might be what the DNM people think. Actually, no, that's what the DNM people think. So So who's really hodling if not like a group of libertarians? And if it's just the libertarians hodling, that may not be so great for the long-term proposition.
Well, see, that's kind of like its own incentive structure, I guess, if you will. Like, people always try to isolate the incentives of like a single cryptocurrency and just talk about it like it exists in a vacuum. And that's just completely fallacious. Like every single one of these systems exist in a wider like meta incentive structure where they are all informing and distorting each other's incentives internally just by existing in that same like wider structure. And like, it's a very valid point to wonder like whether the store of value can actually hold up when we've actually seen Bcash fork off now. Like it's happened and there's more of these forks in the pipeline. But it's like, does counterfeiting the US dollar undermine the utility of the US dollar if it's clear as day that it's a counterfeit? If there is absolutely no way whatsoever to like slip that by somebody and have them think it's a real dollar? And I mean, at that point, like, wouldn't you be able to look at all of these forks more as a derivative? As opposed to its own like core asset functioning as a store of value?
Well, the United States is an apt comparison because the United States will aggress you try to counterfeit them, and it may be that cryptocurrencies need militaries attached in order to keep their identity contingent. Like that very well could be part of the governance solution required. It's certainly a daunting task. But, I will say that like Lieberland has been proposed, and I don't think that that's going to go anywhere. But like this sort of thought has already started. And I'll tell you what else I've realized too. I don't know that Bitcoin's pitch is as good as religions are at keeping faith. Like if faith is what keeps Bitcoin together, and whatever identity it is that Bitcoin seems to maybe have right now with Core, then, well, maybe faith is a better framework. Maybe faith is the government you need. And I see that happening with Dash. And it explains everything you've ever seen in Ethereum. Ethereum is just a religion. I don't think that there's. I had a sort of breakthrough. I think in the last a few months when I saw the flippening starting, and I'm like, this is completely decoupled from any fundamental value or science. This, if you talked with Ethereum guys, in fact, I'm going to publish an interview here right after this interview on my Patreon. I had with a fairly prominent Ethereum guy, and it's very obvious to me that they just don't care. Because they don't have to care, because faith is what is keeping these things together. So like in that world, then, all the science in the world just may be completely irrelevant. And that may be the hard we have to deal with.
Well, I mean, it's like two things. Is the way you keep tying it back to Core. I mean, in a way, I can see what you're coming from, but I completely disagree. Like, at least speaking for myself, like I don't just define Bitcoin as what Core does. Like, if Core did something that I really fundamentally disagreed with, I would tell them go fuck themselves in a second. Like, I am operating on the notion of an actual scalable layered protocol stack. And, I might not have, like, I'm definitely not the smartest person in this space, so I don't have that whole stack really solidified in my mind and how it would work. But abstractly speaking, I am not just following Core. I'm following whoever is actually going to develop a workable, scalable stack that doesn't just throw everything at the commons and just assume that somebody's going to eat shit and it's going to keep working. And, really, to go back again to the notion of all these forks, I don't really think that shakes the faith in the meme, so to speak, in any way whatsoever amongst any sizable group of people or any rational person. Because we haven't seen a fork yet that is manned by a competent group of people that actually understand like how to structure things in a stack that way to manage the data cost that's pretty much just externalized on the commons of users' nodes. And so you might see the retard brigade go fork off and form their own cult. But eventually, unless they attract people that really understand the nuances and the technical realities of that, it's just going to implode on itself eventually. And it's I mean, it might sound arrogant, like an assumption, and it is, but it's guaranteed to implode on itself.
I don't see that as guaranteed, but if you do, then the problem is solved. Now, everybody else can decide. But, here's what I see. I love Core. They are the fucking smartest guys in the room, in any room I've been in. And I have, no complaints over them. I'm sure they've done things here and there that could have been done better, but I also see that they did it better than I could have and better than most anyone. So I love Core. But the truth is that resentment builds in communities, independent of Bitcoin. Just in general, resentment builds.
Yeah.
And you saw that happen with Ethereum, and you saw that happen with all these ICO nonsense. And that is power for politicians. When you have resentment, the politician will come and he will say, your resentment is valid. You have been oppressed. The universe is against you, but I can save you from the bad guy. And that's what happened. And the bad guy was Core. Now, these people that, are just maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say uneducated, but something like that maybe, they then started to explore this. Now, this has happened a number of times and it has been unsuccessful. However, I will say that the Overton window is expanding. And as the Overton window expands, things that were once unthinkable are on the table now. And that's kind of bad. So, like UASF never would have flown in 13. Bitcoin Cash, never would have flown either in 13. And now it's assumed that these are part of the bargaining tactics. This is a realm of thought we need to go in. And that breeds now more extremism in the form of changing proof of work. So, some of the core devs have spoken out. That would never have been said prior to 2016, maybe 15, somewhere in there. And so I can see the window expanding. And I don't think that the universe owes us gold for many reasons, not least of which is, again, the species problem, which is that Bitcoin is what the governance says it is, and that is completely undefined. And it is not. The structure of gold is immutable, atomic number. It is as science as it gets in the material world. And that doesn't apply to Bitcoin. In the case of Bitcoin, what is it? Well, it's what Core says it is. And that's not decentralized.
To jump in real quick, that's not really the case. I mean, it's the network effect that is really defining it in terms of value. And it's the software any individual wants to run that defines it in terms of the individual. So, I mean, it might not hold its usefulness in terms of network effect or value as far as commerce or trade or speculation, but Bitcoin is immutable from my individual perspective as long as I'm running my node. And that doesn't change whatsoever. So it's not really the internal immutability of the system that's at question. That's not. It's the immutability, or rather the tenaciousness of the network effect and its ability to maintain that social value. And that's what the experiment is, Chris. I mean, Bitcoin is an experiment in anarchy. Can an anarchic system actually function as a core piece of societal utility as a currency? And I mean, it really comes down to we have to just see. I'm not trying to make any absolute claims in that sense. I'm just especially when discussing things like emulating John Nash's industrial consumption index. I'm just speaking in terms of the caveat that it will, but that I'm not actually assuming that is what is going to happen. You know what I mean?
Well, it seems like some of the conversations I've had prior, and even at the start of this conversation, there was more entitlement than you just expressed recently. I'll tell you what else is also new that is disconcerting. You mentioned that the network effect is what matters, and I certainly agree, though what I would say is that perhaps the network effect is what we call it in computer science, and liquidity is a very similar concept in finance. And the shitcoin liquidity is growing in many ways. Now, I see that we have systemic risk in the form of Poloniex on the extreme shitcoins, but it seems that all of the exchanges, in fact, is a matter of liquidity. Well, then you're in a world now where people will just use Ethereum if it has more liquidity or the same liquidity as Bitcoin. It'll be at parity with Bitcoin. And it doesn't matter that Ethereum is stupid because it's faith-based. And the exchanges will add that network effect, and it's entirely conceivable to me that the network effect will improve across the spectrum. And if Bitcoin's governance descends into increasing nihilism and misfocus, then what you're going to see is people like maybe Barry Silbert will join the shitcoin trade, and you will see other leaders join these things as they decide, you know what, I can't work within the governance system of core, perhaps, so I will bet money that I can pump this other thing, and then when the liquidity is there, they might jump to the next one, or they'll stay there for some period of time until they can exit their bag. That's a very real possibility. I don't accept that Bitcoin is anymore destined for greatness. I would like that to be the case. I would support that being the case, and I would fight for that being the case, but I don't accept that the universe owes that to us.
Well, no, it most definitely doesn't. And then there's always the potential that that's not how things play out. But I mean, I think you're like, this is right from you and Junsith, man. Like the thing that's going to win is what can manage its externalities the best. And in terms of externalities, that's the data that you are imposing on the commons of validating users. And like, what else out there is actually doing that? Like, there's nothing. There's Mimblewimble as a design that could do so more functionally. But like, what else is there? I mean, it's nothing. So eventually it's like, if you do have like the situation you just spelled out, where you have liquidity pools pretty much attaching themselves to these complete shit projects, and it doesn't matter that they're shit because the liquidity's there. Well, it's going to grow and grow, and everything that goes through that phase, it's going to be the next speculative bubble. People funnel in and try to chase those gains until it hits that point where it cannot manage its externalities anymore, and it implodes on itself.
So Ethereum's externalities can be fixed overnight. That's the easiest problem in the world. I don't agree that I no longer believe that's an issue. And the easy way to fix it is just to reset the Genesis block, which they're very likely to do.
Yeah, but then that only really comes into play when you're talking about people who don't give a shit about the other value add, which is the sovereignty of money. And I mean, it's not only people engaged in shady or illegal activities that are going to want to have their money stored in a system that's not based completely on faith and trust. Because, yeah, they could do that to manage their externalities, but now all of a sudden, every value add of a system based on a blockchain just went out the window. There is no history integrity being protected. There is no guarantee of being able to utilize that if certain players don't want you to. It just becomes absolutely in every functional way identical to the kinds of financial tools we have now.
Well, ignoring the fact that if these things are like identical to what we have now, then why do we need them? But sovereignty of money is a libertarian faith, and you can probably know that because most of the world doesn't see it that way. Like this notion of sound money, of the moral goodness of money, that seems to be very libertarian. And in the sense that might be your faith and the tenet of your faith. In the case of Ethereum, the tenet of their faith is to pump and make more money. Like they would not. I don't think that they would lose anybody.
Yeah, but
as evidenced by the DAO.
Though, assuming that want has to come from an ideological standpoint, and I think that's a really wrong assumption. It's just as simple as, fuck that, I don't want anybody being able to take my money away. And there really is a lot of people in the world who feel that way. It is my money. Who the fuck are you? And when you really look at the implication of where financial policy is going in the long run, looking at countries, in some parts of Europe, like places like Japan, especially India, with their fucking little cash seizure experiment. The minute that central banks start moving towards negative interest rates, move towards demonetizing cash, you can bet your ass anybody out there who is not completely retarded or has friends in high places is going to be of the attitude, I don't want anybody to be able to take my fucking money away.
I don't think that is a value that most people have. And I say that because we have solutions to that problem. And all of those solutions have gigantic opportunity costs, which also apply to Bitcoin. So in a world where there are no opportunity costs for that value, yes. But in the world where there are opportunity costs, people have generally favored, investing in stocks and bonds, because most people find that to be a more profitable and less risky path to wealth than putting gold bars under their bed. And that seems to apply here. Although I think in the case of Bitcoin, you may have just as much risk and maybe more holding Bitcoin than holding gold, as we've seen with many people who've gotten robbed. The Mission 20 guy just lost like $10 million this year. So I don't accept that there aren't opportunity costs to that value that aren't significant.
Well, yeah, but it comes down to those opportunity costs are there because of the young place that this entire space is in, and the fact that you really haven't had everybody attacking all the angles of user problem or user interface problems to really try and solve those opportunity costs. Because given the caveat that is done, a lot of those risks just disappear. And I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying, Chris. I don't mean to assume that it's guaranteed going to work out that way, that, everything's going to be solved and we're going to go to the moon. But given the caveat that all these disparities, these extra opportunity costs, these problems are solved, well, given those caveats, why wouldn't it go that way?
Well, I don't accept that. Well, first off, I don't think the space is really that young. I think that at this point we've been around for, more than 5 years. And so I think in Silicon Valley terms, I don't think that it is necessarily nascent. Especially in Bitcoin years, I don't think it's nascent. We can see that these problems are probably systemic in the form of, attacks and big exchanges such as Bitfinex recently. And I just think that for what value really is there to having a push-based mechanism over a pull-based mechanism, unless you are underserved, and the majority of users in the space are not underserved. And I don't think that the universe is going to give us a solution that is better than clawbacks, which is what incumbent systems offer.
Well, I mean, though, you can build that on top in many ways, again, if you scale things out in a layered stack. There can be a side chain with whatever rules you want. You want customer chargebacks built into that, and go ahead. Or, for instance, there's absolutely no reason why a payment channel has to be 2 of 2 multi-sig. You could have arbitrators in a payment channel system. You know what I mean? You could have a payment channel set up where everything on the user's end is all signed already, but needs that third signature to actually get finalized. And I mean, there are 1.5 million ways that you can build those kinds of features into things. And it's having that push-based system on the base layer is what allows that to function in that apolitical way. And without that, none of these things could be built with certainty on second layers, because the ability to claw things back on that main layer undermines any other secondary layer's ability to guarantee a similar thing. Because, hey, they pull something back, well, that could get pulled back by somebody else. You know what I mean? And in terms of the opportunity cost of exchanges, right now there is a method using Blockstream's satellite feed to set up a completely hack-proof exchange setup. I actually know somebody working on it right now. You literally just have a totally air-gapped computer with nothing but the radio feed through the satellite, and that's it. You just sign things air-gapped. You don't even need to have a hot wallet as an exchange anymore. You just need to have somebody who can sit there, manage things on the air-gapped machine, and verify them before they broadcast them.
So I heard that, and I can respond to that. The internet was a little off. I don't know if that's on your end or mine. Can you hear me just fine?
Yeah, we can be fine.
What part got cut off?
No, I heard you. I just want to make sure that I wasn't the one who was going to be hard to hear.
Okay.
Yeah, so as far as multi-sig solutions and such, all that's good. Again, to what end? Because the inconvenience of all of that is non-trivial. And you still have vulnerabilities in many forms, such as people posting, maybe you have a browser extension that changes some digits around, and you go to route value, and now it's sent to the wrong address, or your two-factor authentication buddy is off. I mean, there's where you can't satisfy like a signing request, or just two people get hacked out of the three. Like all of that, I think all these things are great. And again, to be clear, I love fucking Bitcoin. There's amazing uses for it, but I'm highly skeptical that these things are superior alternatives to incumbent infrastructures, and would be tolerated in a world where Bitcoin price wasn't going up regularly. And I think that all of these are things that people want to believe in primarily because they think that they can make more money on it, and they don't actually need it even themselves. And I don't know that the rest of the world will necessarily buy that.
Well, I mean, it really comes down to just the scale of liquidity, because, it doesn't matter if like Joe Schmo isn't using Bitcoin because he's got his Visa card and they guarantee him chargebacks. If you have significant amounts of like big corporations using a system like that to settle money, or if you have large black market use, or if you have a country like Japan that's, I think, is very quickly moving towards a hybridized system where they're attempting to put something like Bitcoin on even footing with the yen because their entire monetary policy is fucked. And so like it doesn't really need to get the whole world literally on board with it.
Here's the thing. A Japanese monetary policy may or may not be fucked. I'm not really capable of evaluating that. But it doesn't mean that they go to Bitcoin. They could just as easily prefer gold, and they can just as easily prefer dollars over that. Or Ethereum. Like, that is, again, their faith. They have either faith in gold being redeemed, or they have faith in these other types of things. And here's another big systemic risk. I don't think the regulators realize that these cryptocurrencies are as useful as their liquidity yet. Because if that is, in fact, what they decide, then they will turn off the spigots, the on-ramps into these systems, and reduce that liquidity, because the entirety of the regulatory structure as is exists to prevent liquidity in censored markets. And if they see that they have control over this, and that all this does is, and this is what I believe it does, it's very cool, but that it services the markets that are being censored, then they will just include it under the rubric of censorship in the markets that are being censored. So like, to suggest that you buy Bitcoin in like 50 years from now, it'll be great. Well, it could be 50 years from now, there isn't any Bitcoin exchanges that work with registered value. And that's going to be a really big problem.
Yeah, but that's not really a uniform global problem. It's a regional, national problem. I mean, what does it matter if they make Bitcoin illegal in the United States if Russia is literally running national mining companies, lets the shit happen, no problem. If it's really integrated as like a dual currency system in Japan, and they're using it every day, and the black market in America can simply work OTC and illegally pricing off of those markets. And I mean, it really turns into a game of chicken. Like, okay, you're going to fuck yourself? Well, I'm going to take advantage of that. Oh, wait, I'm not going to fuck myself because he'll take advantage of that if I do. And so on and so forth all the way down.
So, like, you can think that, but we've already seen governments succeed in very real terms. Like these sort of currency wars that I think we probably even think are conspiratorial, we believe in. But when it seems like it's tied to our ability to speculate, we kind of engage in willful ignorance and say, no, these all-powerful evil governments aren't so all-powerful and evil that they can, keep us from making money. That's generally what I see there. You have to consider that in like any form of remittance, the majority of the regulation is in the originating country. So if you are sending money to Mexico, the bulk of the cost is on the sender side from the United States to Mexico. And so in terms of these markets overseas, like the prices that are there, that's all fine. But if the liquidity is low, very few people are going to take the risk. In fact, even if the liquidity is high, I think very few people are going to take the risk. And the people who are going to take the risk are just as likely to rob you as they are to service you, because you have no recourse at that point. So you got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's all potentialities at this point. But I mean, like, I appreciate your skepticism. I feel like at times you go like overboard with it. You go so far down the route of skepticism that you don't flip the coin on the other head and go, okay, well, optimistically, if things line up this way. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I'm not making prognostications here. I am speaking an opinion, that isn't being spoken. I always strive to argue for Bitcoin the best, and I always strive to argue against Bitcoin the best. And depending on what I hear, I generally choose the alternate argument so as to continue improving my cognition. So I'd love to argue for Bitcoin with someone like Peter Schiff. I would take a very different approach to that argument than most people have, because I thought about it a lot. And it would be good just to win, frankly, and to improve my skills. And right now, since there's so many people pumping, it's like, well, I'll take the path less traveled. I'll improve myself there. And so that's a big part of my motivation, which I think is frustrating for people, but I know is useful to me in improving my abilities. And let it be known that Chris DeRose loves fucking Bitcoin. So he loves it so much that he wants to be able to argue it better than anybody else is a big part of it.
Yeah, I hear you. But I guess I've kind of been just dominating the whole side of the conversation, though. Anybody else have anything they want to say or ask Chris?
There's somebody in the channel who I saw who said that he's not convinced that the U.S. government could cut us off. And a simple answer to that is that we've seen these things in the past with, art was something I think that was less regulated at one point than it might be now. We saw it certainly with e-gold. We saw it certainly with Liberty Dollar. And you're going to say, oh, it's centralized. And I'm going to say, well, guess what? I don't know that Bitcoin's development isn't centralized. You've got a few people who are able to make gigantic decisions. And that's risk. I don't know how it'll go down. You also have gigantic liquidity centers like Coinbase. I don't know what the difference maybe is after a point when, let's say only Coinbase and Kraken and two others are routing the value. They could just as easily take those companies down the way they did eGold. They have to issue 5 times as many subpoenas, albeit that's only 5 subpoenas. And if you think that it's too big for that to happen, well, I'm not so skeptical. I think that one easy answer is daily fantasy sports, which is something that was bigger than I think Bitcoin has ever been. And it was all over TV. And the New York state censored that business, and it's conceivable that the same thing could happen to a New York exchange or a California exchange. So I think that it's all within their purview. I don't think that these companies are too big to fail.
Yeah,
but aren't we already seeing states compete for regulation in the positive for Bitcoin, with New Mexico and Colorado and different things like that?
We are better is subject to public whim. So you have some well-meaning and sort of idiot politicians out there, we know who they are, who believe that ICOs are this great utopia that we have. And those are the guys that are seemingly driving a lot of this types of stuff. And when the scam, when everything's great, when things are on the way up and everyone's happy and everyone's toasting and no one's complaining. And then as soon as things really start to turn south, then you're going to want people to sit on a stick. And that's when the politicians will come out and they will capitalize on it. Their careers, you saw this with, what's his name up in New York, who ended up, writing the Bitcoin legislation and then turning the private. Yeah, exactly. So you're going to see the same thing happen with ICOs. Someone's going to, make a career out of it. I can even guess who that is. I'm not going to say their name publicly, but I'm talking to 2 people that are vying for that job. And I wish them success because I think these ICOs are mega scams. They're just Ponzi's, most of them. But yeah, the other thing too is that the biggest question with a lot of this stuff is how will the SEC, how will the federal government define Bitcoin? Because I saw Francis, who's a person I respect, Poulet, out of Canada, who's a person who I respect immensely. And I would hate to characterize it as butting heads with him because I was trying to be constructive and I think he sees it that way. But he suggested that he would be inclined to sue SegWit2x miners in such an event that they would start to mine. And it's well, geez, I don't know that we want the government deciding what Bitcoin is.
Well, see, that's ridiculous. But I would be perfectly happy suing a liquidity provider like Coinbase if they were to misrepresent a 2x fork as Bitcoin. I think that's black and white consumer fraud, and it would be a giant headache. But the moment you drilled through that headache, that's a cut and dry case in court. And that again kind of draws back to like what I say is the definition of Bitcoin, the chain that is validly recognized by every client going back to the original. And once you really drill that in, I mean, like a miner is just moving away and participating of their own free will in a different system. But a liquidity provider or exchange like Coinbase that is misrepresenting a different asset as Bitcoin, that's consumer fraud.
So Risho weighed in here, and I agree with him. The problem with that is that you can never hard fork with that mentality.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's fine. But now you got a bigger problem, which is number one, Core is going to hard fork, which means you need to lead a party or a group of individuals to prevent that. And here is how the politicians work through resentment is in the case of a hard fork. Now you believe you have legal culpability and you can build a case for it and you can start to market it and sympathetic parties will agree. And that's a problem. You may or may not succeed. But I think we're still is you're going to have like you're going to have this gigantic crisis of faith where like I think a lot of people are going to say like, well, if the federal government is like weighing in on what Bitcoin is, then what did we achieve here? Because they decided that, Core is who decides what Bitcoin is, and now it's no longer decentralized. Maybe, I don't know, but it seems very problematic.
But see, that's like not how I see that. I see that as just the government recognizing what is the common sense definition of Bitcoin if you really just break it down to its most basic elements and try to find a root of that definition. And I mean, yeah, it means we can never hard fork. So what? We can effectively horseshoe in literally anything with a soft fork. Like it's not an obstacle in the sense of anything but having to maintain like legacy compatibility with data structures where you're just shoehorning things in instead of doing things optimally. And I think that's where we're going anyway. I mean, I would support a hard fork if there was consensus for it, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Well, so then what you're doing is you're kind of moving the ball into the territory of what is compatible. And you might say that, well, if the clients can parse it, then it's compatible, but you have backwards incompatibility on some features with old clients. So the public now has to decide, is soft forked UTXOs of a different nature than non-soft forked UTXOs? And how is that really any different than hard forked UTXOs, other than some people can relay it, albeit not use it? And that's
well,
because
be it's still valid. And that's the entire reason that op-true was included in the scripting stack. Something can be marked as valid as long as the internal consistency of things check out with anything actually validating it. And I mean, that's really like, it's like I said, it would be a giant headache, but it's the common sense conclusion in my opinion. And Risho, technically, if you want to get down to it, we already did with fucking Counterparty. But you know what? The difference is like clients will accept it, they'll parse it, it won't go invalid and kick it out, but they're not going to accept them as Bitcoin as far as all the clients go. So
you make the case with certainty, and that's fine because you are certainly of that opinion, but you'd be surprised at who isn't of that opinion. And what will have to happen is a lobbying effort. And you will find that you have 20% of the community support or 80% of the community support or someplace in between. And even though it's open and shut to you, you're basically reverting to what Risho is saying here, which is that what the overwhelming majority of the community decides what Bitcoin is probably what Bitcoin is. And I am inclined to agree with him, but that leads to all kinds of problematic things, including why isn't and how isn't a Bitcoin a I don't know, some shitcoin ICO or something like that. And, like, there's answers, but
see,
it's weird.
That's what I define Bitcoin as, because it is literally the only definition I've ever been able to think of that does not require pretty much appointing an authority and going, they decide, as far as a consistent definition.
What? That is weird.
No, that whatever chain is compatible with every client going all the way back to the original is Bitcoin.
We have a point here in the channel that I think is a good one. didn't see who it was, but it was that, like, what if the Coinbase, and this was something that I don't know who said it, if this guy came up with it or what, but I've heard this before. The question too is like, well, how is Bitcoin different than like a shitcoin? And if the answer is that the Genesis block is different, then maybe what you do is just fork Bitcoin, maybe you soft fork Bitcoin in a way that it has a different Genesis block and many different features. And so now, like, you've technically kept it, pure with your definition, but completely inconsistent with the spirit of your definition.
But again, it comes down to the longest valid chain, which is, again, like the term of what's valid. Because unless you fucking tweak things to, like, checkpoint, which is in a way forking and making things incompatible where they otherwise wouldn't be, it's the longest chain that is valid to that client, unless it's outside of the rules it enforces.
So am I to understand that you would support SegWit 2x if it was, in fact, an adjustment that was a soft fork and had more work to it, but it wasn't a hard fork?
If it was an extension block, I would have no choice. It would be the same chain. I would just either utilize it or not.
And what if core didn't go with it? Does that mean that the miners decide who and what Bitcoin is? It seems to me that this gets a very complicated equation.
Well, no, it can have complicated situations, but really it boils down to if you make a change that breaks that compatibility, you have forked off. You have not forked Bitcoin.
I mean, I'm fine with that. It seems, I can argue it, and you can argue back, and all that's good. But it seems like a lot of people came to Bitcoin because I think that they thought that the structure of Bitcoin was immutable. And here we are. It seems like all of the extenuating circumstances are now adding up. The Overton window has expanded, and I don't think that the value proposition is as immutable as it once was. And I would hope that it is. But like, what happens too with, like, I mean, what really is the governance there, Bitcoin Core? I know that it's a meritocracy, but, like, one of the things that I'm fighting for right now that I see is very important is the reduction of science as a standard in Bitcoin and the replacement of science with oppression. And, like, that sounds ridiculous to me. I think that it won't last, but it seems like in the goal of maintaining some semblance of reasonable discussion, like, science should always trump non-science. If oppression becomes a standard, then I don't know what else could be a standard, but big blocks is certainly just as welcome as a non-scientific view by way of oppression or such nonsense, and, like, it seems to me like the rules aren't that codified in terms of, like, what Bitcoin is then at this point, other than what a handful of small individuals say it is.
Well, I mean, it comes down to what you run and whether it's compatible with what somebody else runs. And as long as that intercompatibility exists on, like, the same chain, it's the same thing. And I mean, as far as core goes, I mean, people, like, propose things and either everybody agrees and Vlad merges it, or not everybody agrees and he doesn't. And they have specifically not pushed forward, like, urgently and hard forks for a reason.
Shinobi, what happens if I don't run the SegWit rules and I spend one of the anyone can spend outputs? Which one is the real Bitcoin? And who gets to decide?
You can't. And one, like, that would be a miner either pissing away money.
But I'm saying which.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Who gets to decide which side is the real Bitcoin?
This is a good question.
Well, one, the second you do that, you're no longer compatible with everything on the same chain. You are initiating a change of what you consider valid that goes contrary to everybody else. But hold on. No, you're following your locally enforced rules. But also, again, this goes back to the longest chain. Unless you have a majority of miners mining that, you will never be a longer chain that is accepted as valid by the network at large.
So if the miners follow me, then that's Bitcoin?
But if a miner doesn't follow you, you can't even do that in the first place, because that transaction will never even make it into a block to cause a diverging chain tip in the first place.
So if the miners do, if the majority of miners follow me, does that make that Bitcoin?
if it's against?
Well, no, because it's breaking the compatibility from every client going back all the way to the original.
No, it isn't, because it's following the rules pre-segue. You guys would be the one that are like changing the rules. The soft fork is changing the rules.
No, because it is still you who are initiating some breakaways. So what you're doing, if you do that and miners do come with, is
like I'm just following the rules as they existed up until you implemented the soft fork.
It's not the rules though, because rules are only localized.
Right.
It's the chain and whether it's compatible with every single one of those clients' rules. The second you or a miner puts that in your block and appends that to your chain is no longer valid to every client out there going all the way back to the original. You have just created a chain that is only valid to a select number of those.
Just real quick, do you see this as a different risk proposition than gold?
Oh, totally.
Okay, continue.
So what if 40% follow my fork? Let's say, just to make it easy, 40% of the users and the miners, such that there won't be a big reorg. Because if I have 60%, I'll just reorg you. But let's say 40% follow me and 60% follow SegWit. Which one is Bitcoin?
The one that didn't violate the rules. Like I said, this has nothing to do with the rules of a client, because those rules are only your rules. Stop thinking about who's running the same rules as who. Risho, stop thinking about everybody running the same rules as you or not. You are running rules, and that's it. Now, is the chain that you are running, is that chain compatible with all the rules out there? Is that a cohesive singular chain? Okay? If it's not, then you have created a divergent chain that has moved outside of the bounds of what is commonly valid. It's valid to you, but it is no longer communally valid.
Well, 40% are following those rules. So what if I just implement a soft fork and it's...
But no, because that's again the thing. If your chain isn't longer, poof, bye-bye, it doesn't exist anymore.
Why? Why doesn't it exist?
Because there's a longer chain that's valid. No, because I think you guys are forgetting how soft forks work
because
here.
I'm following my rules.
No, but Risho, your client will accept whatever chain is longer. It doesn't matter if you have a block now. If it's not greater, okay, it's not going to be accepted.
I have a slightly tangential question, but not really. Maybe you can articulate this for me, Shinobi Monkey. What exactly does Bitcoin have to do with gold?
Simply well, I guess it's more precise, but the finite supply. That's it. That's really it. Just that aspect of the economics.
So does that guarantee ascendancy of Bitcoin over anything with guaranteed supply?
I personally think that it will create the natural market incentives to push it in terms of valuation higher.
And do we even have guaranteed supply, considering that you have Bitcoin Cash, which effectively doubled the supply, be it counterfeit or otherwise?
No, but then again, that's the same way that you can never have a guarantee that somebody isn't going to create a derivative of something.
I'm fine with that. For me, it just seems like a lot of the Overton window expansion has displaced digital gold as really anything but a meme-like quality to it. And I wonder really if these things aren't just, tradable memes.
Well, I think that it's just digital gold is just it's the closest metaphor. Or Beautyon, if you follow him on Twitter, says Bitcoin isn't just money. It is a whole new thing. But when you really try to describe like a whole new thing in simply a word or two long label, like that turns into a head fuck trying to condense like the conceptual design and nature of that into a label like that. So people generally just fall back on the closest metaphors. And I think because of the finite supply and the economics of that, that's just the metaphor that people fall on because it's what it most closely emulates, I guess, in an economic way.
See, I would say that there was a time when people bought Bitcoin because they believed that it was analogous to gold. There was a quality to it that was very much in alignment with gold. And I think that that was true when the structure was immutable. And I think that was true when, I guess a lot of us were more starry-eyed. And I think now the only thing that matters in all of this is the liquidity. And I don't accept that Bitcoin is necessarily guaranteed to have the highest liquidity, given that there is so much money now in all of the competing options. And the exchanges will necessarily promote the competing options to make money. And that would be, something that a different angle on this discussion. We can decide what is Bitcoin, what isn't Bitcoin. But maybe the better way to talk about it is just what does it matter if liquidity is all that is an option here? And what makes the digital gold meme better than, I don't know, like the meme of Jesus or the meme of, some other faith-based idea?
Well, I don't know. Like, it's like, I mean, yeah, it's again, like I acknowledged earlier, it's a valid point, but it really comes back to the managing the externalities and just the way that will naturally like set something up for success, because people are going to want to have something where the asshole can't take your money. And the liquidity, especially in terms of like the high net worth people, are going to want to move into the thing that most closely facilitates people not being able to take away their money. And like as far as the digital, I mean, it's a stupid thing. It's just like a stupid phrasing that caught on, and it's going to take fucking forever to peel it off. I mean, like how do you condense programmable, thermodynamically guaranteed smart contract platform into like two words like digital gold? Like, you know what I mean?
So Shinobi, I have a question. Would you agree that each individual user gets to decide for themselves what is valid?
Also, what I would say is, again, I don't accept. First of all, I don't accept that the externalities of these other chains are easily managed.
Because Risho just asked a question and you kind of popped in the middle of it. He was. Yeah, go ahead. Repeat it, Risho.
So I asked does each individual user get to decide for themselves what is and is not valid for the network?
No. You don't. You get to choose what you run, in my opinion.
But that is what's valid. What's locally valid to you. But there's absolutely zero guarantee that somebody is going to produce something in terms of a block that fits what is valid to you.
Yeah, I think we agree there.
But sorry though, could you repeat what you were saying, Chris, when you got cut off?
No. I mean, all I was doing was to type. I mean, like, look, here's the other thing too: is that like the externality costs of doubling the supply and adding and assessing risk is also applicable to Bitcoin as a result of its, not changing. Perhaps, like it's a stretch, but it could be said. But again, I don't accept that these alternate currencies can't deal with externalities better than Bitcoin. I think that Ethereum, it shocks me. Don't ask me to espouse this view, but it has completely been able to censor transactions against the community promise of the unstoppable code claim without any meaningful repercussions really in the long term. So like, I don't accept now that externality costs matter when there's money to be made in these memes.
But I mean, remember that's kind of tied into a way to the use case people are using it for. And yes, there's room for other things. Like I really do not believe, unless it was very long in the future, that we're going to see just Bitcoin as the only thing. But something else existing, does that necessarily mess with Bitcoin? as long as they each have their own distinctive reason for using it?
All about liquidity. That's what I think. You watch the liquidity, you come up with a metric for it. That's what's going to matter. And Bitcoin's price probably should reflect that delta that it has over the market, or doesn't, if, as the case could conceivably be.
Oh, I guess to be fair, I guess that's just one thing we'll have to wait and see on.
Here's another thing too. Let's just say, okay, this is hypothetical. It is very FUD-like. Let's just say something happens to a principal Bitcoin dev, or one of them ends up, maybe Bitcoin, because it's the largest, ends up in the tentacles of the law somehow. Well, in such an environment that Bitcoin has been completely chastised and censored unilaterally, and other competing options haven't, it's conceivable that the volumes will then increase. And you know what? Like I said, I'm watching infrastructure spool up to like facilitate that. I think we saw one of the larger casinos say they're taking 60 shitcoins. It is my expectation that payment processors will continue to add support for shitcoins, and I think that the value will just route in amongst these markets in much the same way it does with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin hopefully will have the liquidity that it has currently and the advantage that it has currently. But that's the thing to watch. That's the most important metric right now in the space.
Oh yeah, if Bitcoin was no longer a sovereign, unseizable, immutable asset, oh yeah, I agree 100% that all of that money would flood back out into fiat or into whatever actually filled that function.
Yeah, like maybe it'll go to Monero, it's and then Monero will just go whoop right up to the top or very close to it, if in fact the liquidity was higher, which I don't think that scenario is entirely likely, but that's conceivable. In fact, I think it'll probably go into Ethereum, because Ethereum already has it has more liquidity, and I'm told, although I believe, it's a more family-friendly pitch. So it's conceivable that some politician would issue a restriction on Bitcoin transfers and this and that, and then everyone on the darknet will just go right over to Ethereum. Doesn't really matter that Ethereum works or doesn't. It just has more liquidity that day or that month or whatever. That could happen. Yeah, and too, I'll say is that we should be managing our image a little bit differently. I made private messages to a lot of people in the space, some of which were ignored, some of which were not. I do think that because of that scenario, Bitcoin needs to manage its image a little bit differently than it does. And I would use the Tor project as a model for how that should be managed.
Dude, Tor, fuck Tor. Tor is riddled with SJWs and probably government spies.
Tor doesn't have a very good image either.
I agree that it doesn't have a good image, but I look at their material and they are trying very hard. And I agree that there are SJWs there, but I got news for you. I can't stand the fucking SJWs, but part of the reason I can't stand them is that there's so fucking many of them and they're completely unreasonable. And that's a bigger political discussion, but you can't deny their existence.
You guys don't like me?
Davey, you've already begun your reforming from your SJW ways. There is no going back.
Fine.
Sorry, Dave. I don't know you very well. Do you believe in oppression over science as a metric?
No.
Okay, then
we
you're
found
fine.
out that I thought I was an SJW, but I'm actually not.
Good.
He's saved.
They taught me how to use words and not oppression. They did. They being Bob Barker, the internet meme version of himself here, and Shinobi.
Honestly, I don't even care if we decide we're gonna use oppression over science as a metric, because it's gonna be completely lulzy. It's mostly the fact that they're not transparent about it, and that there is in fact a self-realization that such a metric is absurd and manipulative and is being forced onto reasonable people. That's actually the bigger thing that really bothers me.
Yeah, but it's science. You pick your own gender.
I picked to be a Necron, but a year ago, Bob and Shinobi triggered me, and it never went back.
You know what I heard today at the fucking makeup store when I was there, which is a great way to start a conversation? Your gender is your drag. And I'm like, what the fuck world am I in? I heard that today. I was at the Mac store because I need fucking to cover up blemishes and fucking bullshit because I'm a fucking vain moron. And that's another subject. But I was there and I was getting advice from the very gay guy who was giving me the same advice he gives other on-air personalities. That was his starting point. I was like, oh my God, this is a different world than I grew up in.
Yeah. but I don't know. Last thing I really wanted to kind of talk about, sorry to just kind of set up a next topic, is just like the fucking cannibalization and just fragmentation of like social groups in this space right now that just seems to be flying at hyperdrive.
I love this subject. I spend so much time like trying to understand this. A lot of people have blamed me for not being in Bitcoin. The truth is, I generally strive to be like 6 months ahead of the fucking community, and I don't always succeed. But like this is 6 months ahead of the community, and so I've got so many opinions on this. I don't even know where to begin. But I mean, a lot of this goes into the governance stuff. Like I'm watching how politicians work, and I'm learning, and I myself am emulating them in many capacities. And I'm trying to do it to like a agreeable end that is forward thinking, because I recognize that if I don't do it, somebody else will, and these tactics work. But this is a national debate too. The postmodernists are really fucking interesting. I don't know if we want to take the conversation in that direction, but like there's so much really cool shit going on there, even though it's like kind of stupid. Like it's actually a very good way to learn how to manage groups. You can take it in that direction.
I mean, it's not an unrelated topic. I mean, if you want to dissect things like binarily, our BTC pretty much is the fucking postmodernist of the Bitcoin space. Up is down, down is up. I don't need logic.
Absolutely. Okay, so like you're not entirely wrong. Like this is a Mickey Mouse comprehension of postmodernism that I have. It's probably better than most of the people here, so I'll try my best. But in addition, this application of that theory is also pretty far removed from what it states. But a lot of this is kind of rooted in Marxism and this notion of like the bourgeoisie against the proletariat. There is this truth that there are the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots greatly exceed the haves in most societies. And so tactics for like creating resentment for the haves with the have-nots have been very successful for political parties. It's been a really bad way to run the economy, as every communist country can attest to, but it is a wonderful way to mobilize people. And one of the ways that you do that is by identifying resentment that is a source of power. And for any politician who can find a common enemy, that politician can gain in the marketing of their solution and the incitement of the rage against that person. So you saw that with BTC. Roger Ver did that, I think, quite accidentally. Here in Bitcoin, where it's like the retarded like Spooderman of politics, but it exists. And I mean, the people breed resentment in varying forms. And when you show up, and like you gotta remember, everybody like resents their freedom by and large. Meaning, you go to work and you do these things that you don't want to do, and you could be free. You could be a artist, or you could be, banging like some hot chick that you spend all day trying to work on, or you could just like not take care of your kids. Like you can do that. You don't do that for a lot of really good reasons. But like when you then engage in varying forms of escape, be it gambling, as might be the case in Bitcoin, or entertainment, as it might be the case in TV, you are experiencing a taste of the freedom that you yourself don't have. And I think that like with RBTC, you saw these politicians come in, and with the varying channels, you saw these politicians come in, and they sort of extract that. The real truth for a lot of this stuff too is that like one bad apple spoils the bag. So like you can go into a room full of 100 people, and like maybe 20% of them don't like this thing, but you can incite, and that 20% turns into 40%, turns into 60%, and before you know it, you have a majority, and now you are in control. Your group has succeeded. And that seems to happen in these communities. But like for me, what I do is I like to poll, because what you'll generally find is that like 80% of the people don't give a fuck. They just don't care about anything. They care, and that's good, because they care about their specialization, they care about their kids, they care about, I don't know, their dog, whatever the fuck it is. And they just want to be told what the right thing is to do, because they don't have time to specialize, and they genuinely want to see the right thing done. But
so, do you think they don't want to be informed? Or do you think they just want to trust an informed person when you say
the
that?
latter? I think everybody would like to be informed, but the limited resources and unlimited wants prevents that. So they look for an authority.
Okay, sorry.
And I would say for anybody here, beware the politician who shows up and who declares the truth of everyone, or the truth of most. And you see this all the time, especially in Bitcoin, where somebody shows up and says, the channel thinks this. And nobody actually knows what the channel thinks. That's just what that guy thinks. And people just assume like, well, I guess that's the right thing to do, or I guess that's the right opinion. And before you know it, what was originally a fringe opinion became the group's opinion. And this is Marxism 101. You saw that with the Bolshevik Revolution. Bolshevik, I think, means majority. And the majority, as it was an extremely small number of people that became the majority through tactics such as this, declaring what other people wanted, or declaring, what the group decision was. And you saw that in RBTC, and it started to fester into what we have now. This other thing too, I think that's funny, is that like a lot of the big block issue, I think, is a recognition of morality in people who are not comfortable with the underserved. I think that isn't always the case, but I think there's a lot of people who don't really like being identified with that fundamental value proposition. So they're attracted to a value proposition such as coffee because that jives with their other group identities that they have, be it a Christian or just, a decent person at the polo club or whatever the fuck your deal is. And so, yeah, I mean, that's part of what I see in the splintering is, I think as a country, people are getting, this is where it gets into the postmodernism. I think we're finding a lot more people are starting to replace oppression as a metric in lieu of science. And when that happens, the oppressed person has more validity than the scientific person. And if that sounds weird, it shouldn't, because it explains a lot of how the righteousness of RBTC has received as much credibility as it has.
Yeah, I get you like entirely. I mean, like I pretty much spent like 2 or 3 weeks in Craig Wright's private little Slack before me like dropping mentions to things like more publicly probably got me kicked out. But like that was exactly what he was trying to do. Like he had this weird way of just like distorting something that is like libertarian to the core in like the language and the way he was contextualizing it, and try to like paint it as like liberal, and then like use that whole like distortion to like present himself as libertarian when he is like pushing something completely liberal and statist in nature. And it was like a very frequent but very refined and obviously targeted way of like distorting things methodically like that. And that's like totally all I see him doing, like on Twitter, on Reddit, like wherever he goes.
Yeah, he's smart enough to be dangerous. I don't think he's the brightest guy, but he's not to be entirely underestimated either. Yeah. A lot of the postmodernism stuff, everyone should be taking a look. It's really fascinating. Like if you looked into some of the guys from the Briar Patch really turned me on to this. And if you looked into Atheism Plus,
I've heard of it before. Yeah.
TLDR, it is the craziest religion I've ever seen in my entire life, and there's some crazy ones out there. A atheist community realized that there are primarily or entirely men in skepticism. A feminist decided that the reason that was the case, roughly, was because science is a language of oppression, and that the only reason science is the dominant form of logic is because so many people believe it through oppression. And as such, we could have a quote-unquote better system of belief that is non-science-based, that is built through virtue. And if virtue is, in fact, preferred over science, that will, as I guess the majority of the population continues to believe this, that will supersede science. And therein, Atheism Plus the religion was born. And that's a bit abridged, but it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And that would be postmodernism to its extreme.
Hey guys, just think it. The world's the daydream, man. Just change it with thought.
Philosophy will fuck with you. Everyone should really start kind of looking at some of that stuff too if they have free time. It's weird shit, but I really like it. I'm not even good at it at all. I'm like just fucking armchair kind of guy, but like it's so applicable to your daily life sometimes.
Dude,
in ways that are freaky.
It's not thought, it's proof for work. Come on now.
But like, yeah, I'm surprised fucking Bob Barker is not unmuting himself right now. He probably would have just steamrolled over me and took over my half of the conversation.
He's our resident memologist.
Oh, he needs to hang out with us then. I think memes are so powerful. I love them so much right now. It's like huge.
I think he literally started the second great meme war. I'm not sure though.
Maybe a good ICO. I was thinking, like, I'm not doing this. I'm not supporting this. I don't think anybody else should, but it like actually would make more sense than most of these things. would be like an art house ICO that like did basically the Rare Pepe thing, but with like all kinds of memes. And like I don't exactly know the right way that would work, and it wouldn't work for all kinds of reasons. But like the truth is that if these are tradable memes, then like you could just quite literally you could basically step outside of the right identity that is Pepe and apply it to like all kinds of memes, and it probably has like a market. I don't know if it'd be a big market or a huge market, but it's at least conceivable that there would be like that Rare Pepe spirit that would apply to both leftists and rightists if it was decoupled from the Pepe identity. And I wouldn't be surprised if like an ICO could actually kind of work around that. But you know, I'm not into ICOs. I don't want to put my name on that.
We just need Hillary to endorse it.
Pepe Cash for life, bro.
You want like yeah, I mean you want to get the meme engineers in. Like there's like when I was in Japan in Tokyo, there was a couple guys that were making little side money with Rare Pepes, and they're just fucking fun. Like I don't want to put the work into it. It's not a good use of my time at the moment, but like I would love to have like a Patreon benefit of issuing a limited number of Pepes of a Rare Pepe that I liked, and I would do a little bit of promotion on it, and that would be like a kind of a thing. And like, you know, I don't know if it would go anywhere or not, but it would just be fun. And like I think the thing I like about like certainly Rare Pepe is that it acknowledges its irony, and in doing so, it is in fact like a de facto work of art, like very much in the form of like the artist shit in a can.
Dude, like I forget which episode, but I was watching Bitcoin Uncensored on Exotica, and somebody sent me one of the Nakamoto Rare Pepes, and I just like immediately went and flipped it for like 0.15 or something. But I literally spent like the next day just laughing hysterically randomly and like accosting everybody I know. Like I literally got a meme on the internet and sold it for like $100.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our meme economy is 300,000 strong. I don't know how big is the the Bitcoin subreddit. Hold on, let's see.
Like
Bitcoin subreddit is the same size, 334,000 readers. So the meme economy subreddit should be about as big as Bitcoin, and like that's a good subreddit to target with an ICO. So you'd want to go to like those mods and have them shill it. You'd give them, you know, some kind of like deal to do it, and then you get all the guys in our meme economy into this ICO, and that's your fucking, I don't know, it's your get rich quick scheme.
4chan already like paid them off in Bitbean.
Bitbean?
They shut it down. I don't know. The 4chan /biz had a big like uptick in crypto memeing. That's and Bitbean, when it launched, that's when I first noticed it, because Bob Barker and Zeno, they started telling me about the biz pages of just like pumping ICO shit coins.
I mean, Bitcoin is fine. Like it started in, the thing about Bitcoin is that like it's only one meme out of so many, and like they started off with all of this like wonderful and great libertarianism and you know, economic and finance thought. And I think that the place that it'll probably expand into is the economic side of the meme economy, and like not just in the sense that like our meme economy is there, but like, look, when I went to Charlottesville, those guys were all motivated by memes. They showed up there because they got sucked in with some questionable memeing, and they got sold a Kool-Aid. So like there is a value to like attention on these memes, and there is at least some notion of like scarcity in that community that I think can be capitalized. And so I see Bitcoin as like a chapter in the memeing story, or maybe memeing is a story in the Bitcoin chapter. I don't know, but there's a lot of like themes that apply to both, and it's extremely interesting to me. And I don't know why more Bitcoiners aren't on top of this, because we know so much more about this than they do, and they're all fucking like ready to be schooled.
I think. Sorry,
I'm still thinking like Chris, way beyond that. Like the fucking Sargons of YouTube, like the Dave Cullens, like all these guys getting demonetized. My brain is focused on how the fuck do we get those people into the Bitcoin community, because that's two fucking sides of the same coin there. The people building shit to actually monetize things without the regulatory ability to shut it down, and the people who are fast going to need that.
I mean, that's not necessarily a Bitcoin case, because like I don't see where the censorship is in the Bitcoin sense, because they all have access to like traditional finance. So I don't know that they need what's going to happen. All that's going to happen there, two things are going to happen. First off, a lot of them are going to go to Patreon models in the way that I would like to pursue. Then on top of that, the ones that are left are going to have significantly more advertiser relationships. And as that happens, what will happen from there is you'll see aggregators that manage. I mean, I already have people like this that reach out to me, and certainly I'm not even that big. So they're going to have people that want to aggregate talent and then do product specials and endorsements in that way. And all YouTube does with the demonetization is say they don't want to sell ads anymore. Which that actually doesn't bother me as much.
Chris, this is going a lot further than that, though. I mean, there's already been attempts of, like, you know, putting the same kind of screws to Patreon's thumbs. Like, if you saw that whole Gab AI instance, they literally had their hosting provider threaten to shut the entire service down over a single message sent through it. Like, I don't think it's going to just stop with, oh, we're turning your YouTube ads off. Like, unless all these
censorship is real,
disappear, that is going to be a progressively worsening thing going forward, in my opinion.
Censorship is real, and you have my complete and total sympathy on that. Believe me, I've been Twitter timed out, I've been YouTube demonetized, I've been YouTube banned on a video or two, and on and on and on. Reddit, at one point I was flagged. So I'm constantly running afoul of the censors. I mean, the name was Bitcoin Uncensored for a reason, and that hasn't changed. But I just don't necessarily accept that the financial part of it is part and parcel with that plight. And I think that it's significantly more nuanced. You know, like in the case of Twitter, like I think what Twitter wants is to prevent the crowd from being incited more than anything else. And then like these SJWs, like they have their own fucking language because they do. And so what happens is like you run your Twitter campaign, and like I got flagged for a tweet that I made like weeks prior, and so I pissed off some woman. I'm pretty sure this is what happened, and she went through and she found where I called somebody an unreasonable ass twat, and then I made a reference to Nazis, which, you know, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but you know I did. In fact, I think my cat died like that day too. Like, you know, like you have bad fucking days, okay? Shit happens, no big deal. And then you pissed off this SJW, and then she decides that her oppression is so great as to deserve your blacklisting, and then you have another SJW who subscribes to that logic, and then that's that. You know, I think that we're heading towards antitrust accusations on Google and Twitter, and that's probably where that's going to develop.
So, if you think that Bitcoin is at risk for like being replaced by another meme or another coin, shouldn't you be like mega pumping for like side chains, because that could do all of the memes, all of the coins, all of the ideas, and people can just like use it as their playground for like whatever they want, and then all of the liquidity will like build up in Bitcoin.
I am striving to be a secular Bitcoiner. I wish to be not a pumper. I wish to be a independent evaluator of these technologies. I think that our greed is going to make us willfully ignorant. It's a long day. Our greed is going to make us as willfully ignorant as it is pronounced. So like you have to constantly fight it. And so I think that I am adding more value in skepticism and rationalism, and that as a pumper I would no longer have a journalistic integrity. And I think that everyone who's in this space should expect their news source to have that opinion.
Maybe that was a poor choice of words, but do you think that like sidechains is a solution to the problem of liquidity bouncing around between different coins and having it consolidate in one place reliably?
I mean, it reminds me of I can't remember the name of it. What's that Ethereum rootstock? It reminds me of rootstock, where like people decide that the features are what matters. And so like rootstock comes, and I don't even know if they fucking did it, but like it doesn't really matter because, as best I can tell, they had already lost the faith of the people who were looking for those goals. So I don't know that there's any incentive to use a sidechain for somebody who wants to get rich quick. If you want to get rich quick, you either use your Ethereum connections and community and faith, or you create a new, religion, and you entice people to join. I don't know that I accept that people will join the Bitcoin religion and faith when they're here to get rich quick on their shitcoins.
Because they want something of like low liquidity, so it's easy to pump.
You think they want something of low liquidity that's easy to pump in? But like, how does it affect? Why would they go sidechain for that? Like,
You're saying they want to make a new altcoin because it's easier to like manipulate.
Yeah, I mean, again, an altcoin is a meme. So like, you these memes happen online where like you have I don't know, like Spooderman shows up. You got to provide liquidity to this meme, so you have to sell people on Spooderman, and you add Uncle Dolan, and you add Gooby, and And before you know it, there's like a cast of characters, and then we have an identity for these characters, and so on and so forth. I just don't think that the technical part really matters. What you're trying to do is create a meme that promotes and that gets people invested, and so on and so forth. But another thing I'll say too about the sidechains is I don't know that sidechains offers that feature, because it seems to me that value checked out of Bitcoin that can ultimately check back into Bitcoin isn't decoupled at all, and it is merely Bitcoin with additional risk. So there's that.
Isn't all of the Pepe stuff being done in Counterparty though? It seems pretty successful.
It is, and I like that much about it, because I think that the quality of one's Pepes is very much commensurate to the quality of the work that goes into it, and Bitcoin is number one, certainly right now. Also, I have an if party that I just, can't really divorce myself from and don't really want to, in the same way that I kind of do for Bitcoin. As much as I try to be secular, is some ties there. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't think that your sidechain is necessarily secure. It seems like, there's these risk assessments on the sidechain mining that I don't know that I really understand or that I accept that other people do. Let's say you check a Bitcoin out of Bitcoin into a sidechain, and okay, so now that one Bitcoin is worth, I don't know, a bunch of Pepe Cash 2.0s. Well, is it really worth Pepe Cash 2.0, or is it just Bitcoin with additional risk? Because if it goes back and forth, there shouldn't be an independent peg.
Like there is like sidechains are really fucking complicated because you can really design them in a million different ways. I mean, like Blockstream is only really developed like the strong federation like multi-sig model, but like you could do just a merge mined sidechain. You could do a sidechain with a whole different proof of work. Like I've seen proposals for doing a sidechain where you actually have a hybrid of like federated and proof of work, where it's like merged mine checkpointing every other block, but every other like odd block it's multi-sig, so that you limit the attack surface for either side of that to manipulate things. And it really comes down to the specifics of how you design it and implement it.
Like all things Bitcoin, the more extraordinary the claim, the more likely it is to be stupid. As referencing 21 and probably rootstock and some of these other things.
Yeah.
So like as a general rule, like right off the bat, like I'm very skeptical. And then, but on top of that, like to what end? Like I don't know who the person is that wants that, because it seems to me that the near entirely of the get rich quickers have moved on to communities with greater faith than Bitcoin, as right they should. And not that Bitcoin should change, because the greater faith is for idiots, but it's where you're going to extract the most money from greater fools.
Well, the price might float, or it probably will float and be like decoupled from the Bitcoin price. You can always just like wait and move the coins back into Bitcoin if you like don't want to deal with that like price.
We've also been waiting for sidechains for so fucking long now. It's kind of like
Paul,
it's like
Paul Storks like has it like done. Like the spec is complete from what I understand.
I love Paul Storks. He's one of the brightest guys I've ever met in my entire life, and I want that project to succeed. But it's like Paul, I think, is one of these people who I share this value with, but it's like the science. I don't think he's accepted that the science has left the building. I'd like to be wrong about that, but I think what's going to happen is he's going to create this great solution for Bitcoiners that would have been great for Bitcoiners in like 2013 before shitcoins started. And now that the shitcoins have started, like Bitcoiners aren't going to start running shitcoin advertisements like the Ethereum guys are, and like those guys already are heavily invested in Ethereum, and like we'll see what happens, but I don't. This is a solution for Bitcoiners, for people that aren't Bitcoiners.
Yeah, I mean, sidechains I think aren't really going to fit that altcoin model like a lot of people think. I mean, I think it's going to be more for like playgrounds like Liquid, where you want a distributed trust, or like a place where you can interact with like a token with an actual purpose, like a regulatory acknowledged like stock share or something, or where you can emulate like a private bank, or like something like Visa with chargeback features, not so much like pump and dump coins.
But you can
There's this notion of like checking value in and out, right? Like theoretically, like you're going to create like I mean, I've heard so many permutations of this, but like theoretically, you're going to create a side chain. I guess you're going to issue like tokens in your company or whatever. But there's going to be a peg from like your company shares to Bitcoin. Is that the case?
No, it would just be like a pegged Bitcoin, like walled garden, where that pegged Bitcoin could interact with like an issued stock share or something seamlessly. You know what I mean?
Okay, like why are people going to mine exactly? Like what are they getting?
Well, no, that's the thing. You would do that with a federated multi-signature setup. Like a deposit would be a deposit into a multi-sig. Blocks on that system would be signed by the people in control of it. It would simply be a way to kind of take those beneficial legacy features and peg them in a way where they can interact directly with the Bitcoin token.
I don't think that's what's being proposed. I think that you are maybe of the belief that these side chains won't require work. I mean, I know that there are options for non-work. So you believe that the non-work side chains are going to be the ones that succeed?
I don't think right now that really any kind of proof of work based sidechain is really viable because it requires changing the nature of the encumbrance of tokens on the main chain, because you effectively have to put things in control of miners. And miners being a dynamic group, there's absolutely no guarantee you can make whatsoever as far as are they going to act in line with enforcing this separate system when they are effectively in total control over like the coins encumbered on the main chain. Whereas when you do that with a multi-sig model, like it is a static group of people. It is a people who can be legally incorporated, legally accountable, and it's not just this amorphous whoever has most of the hash power of the network at the time. And I feel like multi-sig kind of it addresses that without bleeding over into some systemic externality risks on the main chain.
Okay, so I share some of that skepticism with proof of work, but then if all we have is a multi-sig, which is what like every fucking project in the space generally reduces to, how is sidechains better than just a 7, or 8 person multi-sig, say?
It's just a way to have a system like that is backed by that multi-sig on the main chain in an auditable way, in a way where you can interact with it as a user more seamlessly. It's literally just like an internal accounting for that multi-sig. You know what I mean?
But I think we have that with Rootstock. I think that is in full already implemented in Rootstock level today.
No, that's actually one of the things. Like they were going to start off with a federated model, but the entire intention is to move it wholly to a proof of work model. And that's also really kind of weird because they had some business deals signed with Bitmain guaranteeing them, I believe, like 20% of the fee income from that. So they were essentially literally signing a business deal with Bitmain, guaranteeing some of that miner revenue when, again, like I said, the entire dynamic nature of mining makes that kind of moot, legally speaking, if that situation changes on the field.
But I think maybe you're not seeing the forest for the trees here, because if they're able to accomplish this system in a federated model, and what you're advocating is a federated model, then we're done. It's here.
Well, no, but that's the thing. Rootstock, all the multi-sig was in their model was like a safety net until all the miners on the main chain were mining it, and then it was to be removed. Whereas what I'm talking about is never bringing proof of work in the first place.
You're stuck. Maybe I'll not explain myself. The goal that you are proposing is the state of Rootstock current implementation without mining. So the intent of Rootstock was to continue moving. And what I would say is, no, there's no need for Rootstock to continue moving. The future that you have asked for is in fact already here. Movement can stop and we are done.
Yeah, I would be like, just run it that way.
Okay, so then why care about sidechains?
Well, sidechains has utility for doing like testnet stuff, like maybe you want to try out like Mimblewimble. It can also be used for stuff like implementing things that may be considered too risky to put on the primary chain. So maybe you want to try like a larger block. So it has like a skin in the game way of like a live system being tested where like you're getting better information than you would from like a testnet.
Well, yeah, that's a very big use of it, but mostly from my point of view, it's the name of the game as far as making Bitcoin scale is localizing validation in a way that calls back to the main chain in a cryptographically linked way. So effectively, to kind of be a smartass about it, sharding without sharding. And sidechains are a very relatively painless way in terms of overhead to localize that validation so that aside from that main layer, which is only really a linkage between these localizations of validation, all you're validating is that main layer and your area and the people you're interacting with. And it's just another tool to accomplish that.
So Luke Dash Jr., I think, would agree with the sentiment that this is going to be good for Bitcoin. But I think that that's like all we can do, test Bitcoin sidechain. I think that maybe more will come and that would be great. But my suspicion is that like sidechains will be for testing out Bitcoin. And I don't think that the community wants it for anything else, is my suspicion.
But that's great. If somebody wants like 10 fucking gigabyte blocks, they can go over on their 10 gigabyte block sidechain or some weird goofy thing test out. And if it explodes, like they lose their money, but it's not like systemic risk. So like everybody wins.
Sure. Yeah, that's the nature of the law. Like you can't stop me if I want to go do something like that. Like there could literally be a fucking federated sidechain in existence right now, and we would never know.
The nature of the dialogue, I thought, on this sidechain discussion was whether or not it would eclipse the need for alternate blockchains, and I suspect that we've concluded at this point that it may not.
No.
Okay, but Rootstock, do we not conclude that Rootstock provides the sidechain functionality needed to achieve what you were advocating?
Yeah, it does.
So then, when sidechains comes, it will be a displacement for the existing system that is already not serving the people that do exist but aren't being served because of why?
Well, the people, like all of the RBTCers go into like their like risky sidechain. Like they can move their risk.
I mean, that's already said and done with Bcash, though, man.
How would it be if instead of like forking off and starting Cash through their riot, they just moved into a 8 megabyte sidechain?
Hold on, I want to just make it very clear because I think this is a common misconception. The RBTC has absolutely no interest in the block size. The entirety of that is empowerment of their platform. Like it's a political party, and the block issue has the name on the door, but the actual philosophy is incompatible with sidechains because sidechain is run by the quote unquote North Koreans in some such thing.
But what if the protocol ossified such that basically no one could change it, and then like sidechains was kind of like another layer, like above, where people could play around and modify things.
Like I think that's what's going to happen, but like Chris just said, like they don't give a shit about the block size. This is just about their way.
That's right. They have their governance model on their sidechain, and like someone else could have their governance model on another sidechain. And
they won't, because their goal isn't just to have a sidechain. It's fuck you. Bitcoin is what I say it is, and like deal with it or fack off.
Well, that's tragic.
That's what I think is the case. I really do. I don't even think that would. I didn't even think that would be controversial here. I think anyone who's really studied that community will tell that it's significantly more to do with the resentment of Core than anything else at this point.
Yeah.
And really, too, like this is a statement of like any group. Like there's generally going to be a progressive and a conservative party that just is like a reflection of how communities work. Like by and large in society, you have in fact the haves and the have-nots, and to a lesser degree, you have the progressives and the conservatives. And because older people have more money, the conservatives are generally the haves, and because younger people don't, they are the have-nots. And I think that if you polled the people, you would find that one party would be sort of I mean, it's weird because I guess like RPTC is like, I don't know if they're the progressive or conservative. I think that they're the conservative party, quite honestly, and then like Core might actually be the progressive party. Because,
do you think that Bitcoin's going to keep splintering?
In what way? In the way that I think there is an appeal to the tradition of Satoshi to a significantly greater degree in RBTC, and to the degree that they have rejected SegWit, which is a fairly progressivist solution. I think those two big, and also I think that there's a surprising number of old timers in RBTC, Roger Ver and such. And I also think that there's more libertarianism in RBTC. So I mean, it's hard to say, but I do think that RBTC might actually be the conservative group.
Well, like, Satoshi's vision is just political rhetoric. It's like a really fallacious argument.
I mean, like,
I agree
like,
with-
dude, like Chris. I mean, I can see where you're drawing that, but like, I can't take that. Like,
You're-
almost all of the things like Core is attempting to do in terms of like which I assume based on what you just said you would call like progressive, it is really, it draws back to Satoshi, like the nature of more complicated smart contracts. That's Satoshi built that in for a reason. And even like Lightning Network itself, if you dig through Bitcoin Talk, Satoshi made a post himself about swapping like balance debits between payment channels in a kind of a loose network. And all of these progressive things, it's so-called, are really just the things Satoshi talked about that this group wrote off or was too stupid to understand or whatever the reason was, and just selectively ignores.
Like, what Satoshi said shouldn't matter. He's not like a fucking deity. He left in 2010. His position has definitely become more nuanced since then. And like, I really hate when people speak for him. Like, so stupid.
Well, I mean, it's more complicated than that, though, Risho. I mean, like, people love to quote his, like, oh, a block size raise could happen when needed and just phased in at block height, blah, 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 blah. Well, they also ignore a post he made after that where he literally said that users might intentionally, I believe his words were, fascistically keep the block size limited in order to keep the cost to validate low. So, like, all of these are very one-sided representations of the things that Satoshi talks
But I
about.
just think it matters.
I just want to say that, like, which one's conservative and which one is the progressive party is, like, I think this is true of parties, is that, like, nobody knows at that moment, like, really which one is the conservative or progressive one. And, like, even in, like, national politics, like, I watched in my lifetime, the conservative Reagan Republican Party turn into what is now like comprised of a lot of younger people, it seems to me, and also like the moral party seems to be the Democrats now. Like morality, like not that they are more moral, but like that value of morality is theirs now. So like it's whenever you deal with parties, like it's hard to say which one is conservative, which one's progressive. And there's a little bit of bleed in because like some issues will go some like maybe SegWit is maybe we all agree that like SegWit is progressive. I have no idea. It doesn't matter. But like it may be that one party takes it for like that share of the demographic pie and another one does. So like there's no purely progressive and no purely conservative platform. There are merely people that get sucked in through testing and rhetoric and sometimes design.
Okay.
No matter what Satoshi said, it's entirely possible that he could be wrong, and it's also entirely possible that his position would have changed in the past 6 years.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, he was wrong about fraud proofs.
Dude, like he's not a god. And, I think one of the reasons Bitcoin was successful was because it had an origin story that was very like deity-like. And that's great. But he isn't one because I don't really believe that there's a, magical Satoshi man that came from the sky.
Well, he did a lot of dumb things. I mean, like from a cryptographic standpoint, raw pub keys was stupid. From a security standpoint, like just blindly querying IP addresses for public keys was retardedly stupid. And yeah, I mean, the rough idea was brilliant, but that doesn't mean he's Albert Einstein in every part of the wheelhouse.
I wish people would just review like ideas rather than like their like understanding like what Satoshi would have wanted.
I mean, the appeal to Satoshi also like a political maneuver. Like, there's really no reason to do like an affinity in the belief of others and to cultivate trust with them. That's what that is.
But I think Roger really believes the like Satoshi vision thing.
You got to understand with Roger, like there's a certain kind of person that does what Roger did, and it's a very faith-based person. Like Roger's like, kind of, he's like a very Christian guy. I don't think he is anymore, but was, and I think a lot of that like spirit like drives him. He's here to save the world and all of these things, and some of that's very, very nice. And he has a lot of my sympathy, even despite all of the problems that he's caused, because I believe in his own mind he is genuinely trying to do the right thing. It was appropriate at a time, and it is exceeded now that appropriateness. And I think he's just kind of like people like don't know why they do what they do. Like you talk to your fucking like I don't know, you look at your cat or your dog. Like he can figure things out, but like he has no idea why he's doing it. And I'm not saying that like Roger is as smart as a cat or a dog. Myself, like you have all, especially with people, there's all kinds of shit that you do that you have no idea why you do it. And you do it because your parents taught you, and or you tried things out and it's worked. You don't even know that that's like your reaction. And I see a lot of that in Roger.
Yeah, I mean, the only two people in this space that I really think had any intent of maliciousness in the way they acted were Mike Hearn and now Craig Wright. I mean, like every other person in this space, you have a perfectly reasonable human explanation that just boils down to like whatever psychological aspect, like whether it's ego or just emotion, but like whatever it is, there is a much simpler explanation for why they're acting the way they are.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody asked to be here. Like everyone's doing their best thinking, I believe. And, we're kind of like lemmings, and we just bounce off each other, and ideas like sometimes come out, and like it's astonishing anything ever works ever. Sometimes you get these like very smart men that are ringleaders sometimes, and like they'll stir the pot in various ways designed to make other people think that they thought of ideas that really they didn't. I don't know. Like people shouldn't be too overestimated, particularly in Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So how long are we going on, guys? What's our time limit?
I was literally just going to ask that. I don't know. I think this has been a pretty well-rounded discussion so far, unless there's something else you want to dive into.
No, I would even say longer, but I haven't had dinner yet. I'm starting to get a little hungry.
I know the feeling.
So I appreciate all of your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk. I thought there was something about Luke Dash Jr. we're supposed to talk about.
The only thing I can think of is Roger trying to spin that. But yeah,
dude, it's so tragic that it's so easy to attack Luke. It's like kind of sad.
There's a lot of like for the developers especially. I think in sort of hushed tones and within each other. Like this whole thing's kind of built on like shifting sands, and not that it's like doomed or anything, but there's a lot of like the Bitcoin space is so fucking small. Like you guys are doing your own thing and it's great, but like how long does it really take you to get to know like all the core devs? It doesn't take you very long, and so
it's getting bigger though.
Yeah,
it is.
I mean, like
definitely is. But the noobs are not like
winner, though. So
here. The noobs are not like us.
They're like everything is good for Bitcoin. It goes down like $300. They're like talking about cheap coins, and then like they're like pumping like super hard, and they have like no understanding of like anything that they're talking about. They're like literally just gambling, and it's like feel really bad for them.
Honestly, the Bitcoiners have been eating its own for far too long. I don't know that I'm in any position to do anything about it, and I myself have done a lot of it, so I'm very guilty. But the real enemies are the guys that are like pumping like fucking Joe Lubin over consensus. He's getting all the noobs in, and he's fucking raping them and like, giving them a terrible experience with this space. To shill them nonsense that maybe it's good in that it needs to be done and it wasn't associated with us. But for whatever it's worth, like if everyone can be a little bit kinder, maybe what we can do is like start focusing the attention on people outside of the community rather than inside of the community. It might be a wishful dream. I don't know.
No, I think that's a good goal to shoot for.
I'll go on like the subreddit and I'll like just try to tell people to like be careful and like spend money that they couldn't afford to lose, and like they like don't want to hear anything that isn't like we're gonna be bajillionaires 2 weeks from now.
You know what? Like everyone can do in this channel too. Beware the guy who speaks for the group. Say that as it speaks for the group. However, rules. And I've thought about this a lot. I try to do these are to ask the group. I don't show up necessarily. I do some degree of representation for the group, certainly. But rather than just show up and say like everyone believes X, I do a poll first, and then I say that value. Who decides he speaks for everyone? Everyone agrees with him. And if you are in the presence of such a person, run a poll, run it on Twitter. Just say, hey, can we like actually make sure of that? Because like I don't know that you're right about that, and start getting that done. And then like you know what? Like I don't know, maybe we can even put a hashtag on it, like Bitcoin polls. So that we can all start that we believe. I'd love to see the community get more organized, and that is one easy way that we can do it and without the bullshitters.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that idea, Chris. We should actually start trying to pull people into something like that.
I think that political parties are indeed dangerous at times, but I think that they are also beneficial at times. And so, like, it'd be nice if people, you find a party that you and try your best to compromise. The more you compromise, the more likely you are to succeed. Like, Twitter is all about that. The reason Twitter works is because you have to compromise so much to make 140 characters fit. So, like, I mean, I'm kind of doing my own little thing with the Briar Patch here that is our community that I'm trying to make work through democratic processes. And I don't want to necessarily take the Dragon's Den. If you want Mumble, they can stay here. If they want to come over to our group and check it out, we'd love to have you. But I think that in general, I think it's okay to align yourself with groups. But like the goal of the group should be and I hate to be SJW, but inclusive to Bitcoining and exclusive to shitcoin predatory actions. And then maybe if the Dragon's Den wants to be like an ally of the Briar Patch and what other groups there are, we can start to come up with some very common standards that we can actually use ultimately to stop the bullshitters in RBTC, where we say like, hey guys, we're on a poll, this is what Bitcoiners believe, poll. And then maybe like as people see that there is a little bit more of a democracy happening on the Bitcoin side, maybe we'll start to lose some of the the craziness over there, and we can maybe unify and we can close the Overton window a little bit on what is Bitcoin and start focusing on more productive endeavors. It's, memeing, it may be sidechaining, it may be whatever the fuck it was. That would be like a nice goal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to be spending more time over there, and I'll definitely give everybody in here the direction over. But I don't want to keep you from fucking eating though. If you're hungry though, man, it's like if you want to keep going or not.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good time for me to end it. I'll do a little plug, guys. If you haven't known what I've been doing, you probably all have. I'm looking here, it's a nice little room. The Briar Patch, I'm trying to keep that Telegram only for now. There's a lot of people who want to do like various stuff, Discord and this and Telegram at the moment. So if you find Telegram to be a useful, we'd love to have you. There are some rules in there. Mostly just be nice. Nobody gets kicked for being mean, really, unless you really. But we try to like kind of have functional dialogue. This wasn't the Coin Dojo. The Coin Dojo was defined by TKO knockouts. Total belligerence. This is hospitality. Is I think what we're going for in terms of it seems to be working. It's a little bit more inclusive. And again, it requires compromise. Yes, some people have grown, but you know what? It's working, and we've been growing, and we'd love to have you. And then if you want to support me and be entertained, I'm doing the patreon.com/DeRose, where I put all the crap that fucking I have to deal with from YouTube getting censored, and that I kind of like. We go back and forth on this. I kind of like keeping information asymmetric. I like people not knowing what the fuck some of us know. That gets a little controversial, but you'll get some of that as well. So like right now I have an interview with Jen Senko, who did the documentary The Brainwashing of My Dad, where we talk about varying propaganda techniques, and which you should know if are only so that you can defend against them, but also so that you can maybe use them in your memeing. So yeah, you can check that out as well. And that'll be public. We'll make that one public here in a little bit.
Awesome. Well, fucking thanks a lot for dropping by, Chris. This was really very interesting conversation.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Man.
I'm glad you guys liked it. Thanks, guys.
Take care, Chris.
Man.